Hello all, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
You having a nice day?
It's a wonderful day.
Great. Oysters are being struck down below, so we'll see me on the oysters, that'd be good, won't it? And Bernard's making sure we don't get lost.
So my glasses on.
There we are. Read the map. Bernard's got the map.
Right.
Good time aboard, we're off for a sea voyage. And down below they're shucking oysters as fast as they can for lunch. Isn't that good?
Oh no, in New Zealand it's 1:30.
Oh yes. This is a video.
Oh, video. You're on a video.
So here we go.
Here we go. It's on.
Now where are all these oysters?
It's happening in any minute now.
Your appetite for oysters? Well, I believe they're being shucked down below as quickly as they can do it.
How are you, mate?
Pretty good, how about you?
Oh, well, thank you.
Darling, I'm up the leg of the plane and everybody's coffee's gone. We needed sauces for the morning.
Switched off all night before.
You'd rather go. Chatswood and it all put there before you.
Well, we're now in a quiet little bay where we're going to put the anchor down and have oysters for lunch. It's tough, really tough. What's so funny?
Made a good photograph.
There's the Hawkesbury looking straight out to sea.
The Sydney Rock Oyster grows naturally on the east coast of Australia. It's the only place it does grow naturally. And it's a very, very clever thing. We know it's been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years because high up in the hills here, we just turn that music down. Hello. High up in the hills we find the empty shells where the Aborigines used to come and pick the oysters off the rocks and take them up and eat them. So we know they've been here for an awful long time. And the Aborigines in this area called the oyster the patonga. Okay, so the name for the Sydney Rock Oyster in this area is called the patonga, and so our patonga beach up here a little bit further. So what we like about the Sydney Rock Oyster is its uniqueness, number one in flavour, but it's very different. Just get a few out here to start with. They're very different to every other type of oyster they have around the world. These guys grow naturally in the river. If that's high tide, where Fisherman's Dave's head is, about where his belly is, they grow naturally on the rocks. So they spend half the time in the water and half the time out of the water. Okay? That's what makes a good Sydney Rock Oyster. Now, they've got a mussel and a lid. So when they're growing there, okay, the water's up, they open up, and they take everything out of the water, all the goodies, and when the tide goes down, they close up. So that happens twice a day. So these guys become very, very strong because they're opening and closing all the time. Now the other type of oysters, let's say a Pacific oyster, live in the water all the time. They become lazy, right? They're just open all the time. So what happens when we take them to the market? After a couple of days, they give up. A Sydney Rock Oyster will last for at least 2 weeks out of the water. So that makes them very, very clever indeed. Just because they're so strong. Doing this all the time, they become very, very strong. The other incredible thing about the Sydney Rock Oyster, it's both a boy and a girl, all in the one shell.
Wow.
Very tricky indeed. A boy and a girl, all in the one shell. Often I've got Asia Chinese and things like that, and I've got to explain not boy and girl, just all boy and girl in the one shell. And what happens with the Sydney Rock Oyster? Once or twice a year, the girl part of the oyster she opens up and she puts millions of seeds in the water. Okay? You couldn't even see them. They're smaller than that little pinhead. And they go out with the tide as the tide's going out. And then the tide changes, they come back again and they go out. Meanwhile, the boy comes into action, he opens it up and he puts some milk in the water. So what happens? The milk goes out with the tide and back, and eventually the two touch. And the little baby oyster, it goes out with the tide. If the fish doesn't eat it, it comes back again and it goes out until it finds something to stick to. Right? So the little baby oyster starts its life because he's found something to stick to. Now, the oyster farmer, very clever, he said. If we put, why don't we put 100 sticks in, 1,000 sticks? So all of a sudden, we had oyster sticks everywhere. Originally, they were all made out of mangrove plant because the mangrove plant lasted in the salt water. And suddenly we weren't allowed to cut down mangrove plants anymore. So we just used normal hardwood timber and we paint it in a tar and a concrete mix. So it lasts in the water. For one stick we might get 20 years out of it, right, rather than just rotting away. So the little oysters all gather on the stick. And what I'll do is you can see from that, you could all pass that round if you like, but that's an oyster lease where it's just starting out. So that's how we're going to catch the little oysters. So eventually the little oysters attach to the stick, and about 6 months later, we take the stick back to the oyster depot. So we come back out in the boat, we pick up all the sticks, we take them back to the depot, and we actually scrape the oysters from the stick. So all the oysters are scraped from the stick, and what we tend to do is put them back into an oyster tray. Some people leave them on the sticks, and I'll get to that later. So there's the oysters growing on the sticks.
Could I see that photograph, please?
They're called spat oysters.
You hold up. Mister. Hold on. This next one then. Show me the next photo, would you? Yeah. Okay.
Now, we take them all back in, we scrape them off, and we put them back in a big tray. You want to zoom in on your big tray?
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, now we put them neatly back in big trays like that. But every time we move them slightly up the river. So the spat we all catch here close to the ocean, okay, because it likes it really salty. And every time we move the oysters, we take them a little bit further up the river. So by the time they're finished, they're right up in the brackish sort of water. Okay, that's when they start to get fat. You can pass that one out. So we put them in those trays, and we actually put them in quite neatly. Okay, so you imagine these great big trays, and they're in quite neatly. So they all go back in the water at Fisherman Dave's belly height. Okay, so they're in and out of the water all the time. But what happens with the tide and the wash and all that sort of thing, they actually start going like this. And once they start sticking to each other, they don't grow anymore. So every 6 months, we bring the tray back to the oyster depot. And this is, you've heard of oyster culling. Right? We break the oysters off. They actually quite like it too. They like being mistreated. And we put them back in the water again, nice and neatly, with their lids up. Slightly further up the river, okay? We mightn't all have leases, so we might borrow someone's. 6 months later, what have they done? You know, they're all going like this again, sticking to each other. We've got to bring them back out, cull them again, put them back in the water. So in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. That guy's 4 years old. Okay, every 6 months, in and out of the water. He's 4 years old. 4 years, and the oyster farmer hasn't made any money.
It's a long time for
4 years waiting for this little guy to grow. That's a Sydney Rock Oyster. So finally he says, it's about time I make some money. Let's bring them oysters in and have a look at them, make sure they're nice and fat, and send them to the marketplace. Now, we can send them to the market a couple of different ways, in the great big bags, where maybe we get $6 or $7 a dozen, something like that if they're a good oyster. Or we could open them up and sell them to restaurants. Now, we've all eaten oysters in restaurants.
$5 each for them somewhere.
That wouldn't have been a Sydney Rock Oyster. They've got little bistro oysters, yeah, you could get something like that. You wouldn't get a good Sydney Rock Oyster for that.
No, they weren't.
So, the oyster farmer says, okay, let's open a few up, we'll have a look at them, make sure they're nice and fat, and then we'll send them off to the marketplace. I know the restaurants down here, I think they get $18, $20, $22 a dozen. Everything's talked about in dozens when we talk about oysters. Okay? The oyster is also very good for us. It's got lots of omega-3 oils and things like that. But the oyster farmer says, more importantly, that if we eat 12 oysters every day, will have many children.
Oh, never have another oyster.
Fisherman Dave has 6 children.
There you
You didn't see my baldy head, huh?
What's wrong with the rest of them?
Okay, now I'll grab an oyster here. So there's many different ways to open the oyster. Traditionally, as I said, it had a mussel and a lip. All right, so it's doing this all the time. Traditionally, you get a knife and you'd push it into the mussel of the oyster, and you'd wedge him open and have a look at him that way. Later on, they found there's another way, but I'm going to show you the 2 ways that we use here. The mussel part here. The best way is to put the oyster down and push your knife into the mussel. Now, once your knife's in like that, what you've got to do is kind of run your knife through the top, because the oyster is attached to both parts of the shell. That's called his abductor muscle. Now, he's attached like that. So we've actually cut this little muscle here of the oyster, and there's the little sucker inside. Now, we look at him like this. Ooh, nice and fat. Okay, good looking oyster. A little bit of a dip. Then we cut the other part of the muscle like that. So we just run the knife under, and in a restaurant they actually flip the oyster over because the underside presents a little bit nicer like that. So that is an oyster that's come straight out of the river and washed in salt water. So you'll never taste another one like that, because in the depot we're not allowed to do that.
Pass it round or eat it.
It's still alive. Once I open that, he's going to be alive for a very short time.
Quick, eat it. Oh, it's for eating, is it?
And I want to know whether it was a boy or a girl.
It is salty.
It'll be very salty.
Juicy.
See, in the oyster
These
depot.
hand-picked these special ones to show off.
No, these are not special ones to show off.
Lovely, yes.
Now, I'll just show you again. They're all different shapes and sizes, but they're all the same in one way. And I'm going to show you that. So we find the mussel here.
There's no grit or sand in it or anything.
Well, unless you'd like it. Now that one's a bit tough. So we get the knife in, we jiggle across the top, right, where we cut the oyster.
By that time I got bloody hands.
We're gonna. The reason I just dip it in the salt there is just in case there's a little bit of shell, which there was there. Would you like to try that one?
Yep.
Still alive. And it goes down and goes. Ee!
You obviously speak oyster talk. We're all tasting it.
Okay.
You can't
So
send it back.
That's one way of opening an oyster. I assume the Aborigines used to get rocks and smash them open and eat them. The other way that we found out, it wasn't that long ago, we found out that all oysters are the same. You've got the mussel and the shell, like this, okay? 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. On every oyster is the unique part where they're all growing. So that part there is the softest part of the shell. It tends to grow there, and then the rest of the oyster grows around it. So what we found is we can actually push the knife into 7 o'clock quite easily sometimes. I'll try. The best way to do it, you find your 7 o'clock, you put it down, you push the knife.
No, he's not ready.
This one's going to be a tough one. But they go in like that. Now to open the oyster this way, now we've got to hold it in our hand and we actually turn the oyster. Now while we're turning the oyster, the knife is going underneath the oyster this time. So the oyster is going to finish up on top. Okay? So you can see we've cut his little abductor muscle down the bottom. A male. You can see he's still stuck. Okay? Now if he wasn't stuck, when he opened and closed and the tide came through, he'd just wash out. So he doesn't fall out of his little house. So what we do is we just cut that. And we put that oyster back in there. That's a beauty.
Yeah, you can't send it. You can't send it back, Bill.
What do you think about that one?
Delicious.
It should be. Should be. It's just stop swimming.
So I'll show you that again. They're all the same. 12 o'clock, 6, 7 o'clock. That's the new part of the shell. I've got to see if I can find one that might have a little bit of shell there, just to show you how it was going to push out. That one doesn't have much. This is the new shell There's bits of shell there, and that actually just pushes out there, like that, and then the rest starts to grow around it. So that's how he's starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay? Now, you've all probably heard, no doubt, about the problem we're having in the Hawkesbury River at the moment with oysters, which is very sad because all the guys here at Brooklyn, you know, either third generation oyster farmers, that's all they've ever done in life, and they're all very good at it. The QX virus, actually they're finding now it lives everywhere, but it's like any sort of viruses. Once the river has a bit of a problem, it starts to take over things. And they found that up in Queensland. Unfortunately, it's just happened in the Hawkesbury River, and all of a sudden, there's no oysters. All the oysters on the rocks, you can see once we're going along, all the lids will be open and they'll be dead. Okay? What it does, it doesn't hurt humans, it just stops the oyster from eating, from feeding. So it just shrinks away. Now, there's lots of theories to it. I have my own theory, which I think is as good as anybody else's. I think we've only known this country 200 years, and this might be something that just happens every 300 or 400 years. We don't really know. But what we found now is that if we clean the whole river out, get all the oyster sticks and things out, we can start again. But in the meantime, they've produced an oyster for us, which will start growing here, and they're very, very quick. They're actually a Pacific oyster, so they're not going to be as nice. They grow in a year, right? 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, you've got an oyster. But if you let them grow too long, they become awful. They become big, chewy, hard things. So there's going to be a lot of work with that. But in the meantime, they're producing strains of Sydney Rock Oyster that they think are going to live here. So it'll all start to happen again. In the meantime, we're getting oysters still out of Brisbane waters, right? So oysters ship everywhere. You could get spat from another part of the country, you know, to bring it up. So it's it'll all keep going. Where
Spat. Who's spat?
spat is the baby oyster.
Oh.
The baby oyster. Have we got some oysters to go, girls? Someone was busy this morning opening oysters. I'll get the girls to hand out some, but in the meantime what I'll do is I'll start opening a few, and I'll make sure everybody tries a fresh one, because they'll taste very different to the oysters we open in the depot. As I said, in the depot everything's done with fresh water, so you're washing a bit of the flavour out, where here you're going to have it the way the oyster's meant to be. The other way of opening the oyster in some of the depots now, I don't know if you've ever seen it before, they use a little thing called an air gun. So they've got an air compressor, and they open them very quickly. In the markets you'll see them. And they actually go in there at 7 o'clock, and the little gun goes, so they don't have to push so hard. Tap, 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 tap. They just flick it out. Tap, 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 tap. Flip it out. So then they can
The
open.
Aboriginals, did they eat them? How'd they open them?
I imagine they just smash them with rocks.
Smash them with a rock.
Give them a rinse out. They don't.
What?
Get it sideways.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Without any warning.
Yeah, and they you can put them on the fire. If you put one on the fire, they'll just open up. All sorts of ways of opening it. But I certainly prefer them fresh like this. I think that's the best way to open it. I mean, you can do all sorts of
Well, I
things with
never
them.
have them with all that stuff you get at restaurants, you know.
As long as they're a good fresh oyster.
Isn't it? Yes.
You said that you keep them for 4 years before you hand them out. What about 5 years or 6 years?
They'll get slightly bigger, but not much bigger. 4 years is about the optimum, and that's what we call a plate oyster. So that's going to be your best oyster you'll get in a restaurant. What this lady was talking about before is they started producing different grades, so people could start harvesting their oyster at 2 years and 3 years. So 2 years, you might have been to one of those all-you-can-eat sort of places where there's oysters everywhere. They're probably only 2 years old. Okay, so they're very inexpensive compared to a good plate oyster. So again, there's his muscle and his lip. This one I'll just push the knife into his muscle. If you open quite easily, slide the knife across the top. There's the oyster inside. There was the new bit of the shell, going to grow out at 7 o'clock. Bit of the abductor muscle, we'll give him a little bit of a clean. That's a good fat oyster. Look at that for our cameraman, eh?
Can I see it really close up? Got you. He looks good to me.
Yeah, his name's Ollie.
You got to wait.
You're last, Noel. You're going to take all the photos.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just ask a question, please?
Please.
When you do introduce the Pacific oyster, is that going to in any way impede on the conditions for the rock oyster?
No.
Doesn't.
No. We've already got them here.
That's right,
But you know what we've been doing with them for years? Throwing them away.
I believe there was one oyster that's come in from Tasmania.
That's a
that
Pacific
has
oyster.
created problems.
The Coffin Bay oyster?
Tech or university, or do you just trial and error with your family or something? How do you know all this stuff?
He reads a lot.
Third generation. You get to know everything. And I still think this is a very important part of the river. And the oyster farmers. Well, we're trying to get some money out of the government at the moment to help clean the river up. Yeah. I mean, you've got all these suburbs that keep putting sewage treatment plants in and putting, you know. No, I don't. These oysters came around from Brisbane. What, just around the corner where Gosford is? That's not in there. The actual little micro, whatever they would call it, they find you now lives everywhere. But it's when the condition changes that it attacks. It gets strong and start attacking. Some of the Hawkesbury River, the condition changed. Now, it could be drought. I mean, we've really gone through drought. I don't know if you all remember, but it was probably only 20 years ago when you couldn't cross the river up at Windsor because it was well underwater. You know, maybe 25 years ago. That doesn't happen anymore. So this poor old river doesn't seem to get its flush that it should be getting. Comes up 2 metres and goes out again, and it changes. Yeah. So, at when the moon's in a certain phase, you get very little movement. The water becomes really crystal clear. I mean, you can see the sandy bottom here. I'll keep opening a few of these. Yep.
Any good, Marge?
I didn't always like them. I actually just kind of had one second.
You like them?
Oh, they're great, Noel.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You're not going to send them back then?
No, I don't think so.
Ah, great. It's really tough, David, isn't it? What are we going to do next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday is the walk.
The walk. Oh, are we going to have oysters then too? Oysters then too?
The walk is from Tempe to Canterbury.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope they got some oysters in the river there.
It's the end of Ville until some Canterbury tails.
Oh, great. Great stuff. All gone. All gone. What you got there, Don?
I got just something for you to drink.
Oh, it's awful, isn't it? Awful. It's not good for you.
Got enough for you.
But no oysters left, though.
What's that? You can see this one, it's had all sorts of growth on it. Yeah. And that was the new part of the shell.
Gotcha.
It was going to come out.
Gotcha.
Right, thank you very much.
Yep.
Beauty. Yeah.
Oh, that one. Crack, we'll try and rescue that because that's a nice oyster.
Yeah. Looks good. It's a big one.
Did I get any on a plate at all?
Well, they kept coming down, so just let it. They kept coming down and
Can I have that
going.
one?
No, it's upstairs.
Just go this way.
People upstairs haven't had them. I said I'd take them up. That's why I wanted. I knew these people would keep coming down.
Yeah.
But it was the people upstairs. I just didn't want them to miss out.
Well, I could run up and open some upstairs.
Do you want to? Well, it's up to you. It's up to you what you want to do. You can do them here, and I'll take them up.
They're so different, aren't they?
Anyone that comes here, I'll just slap your hands.
I know, they won't.
And these are just for upstairs. I'm going to clear these, and then we're going to get the sandwiches out because we have to be back by 1:30. So.
An oyster, it ain't easy. Opening and shutting with the tide. In and out, up and down, poked at all the time. And I'm only 4 years old. The oyster, let's sing hip hip hooray. Sometimes I'm butch and sometimes I'm gay. I live on a painted stick underneath the sea. You guys came along and wanted to eat me, and it does not mean me. Some people say that oysters make you horny, whoop-hoo. The farmer says it doesn't, also will do. Well, don't eat more than that. They're an aphrodisiac and you'll be at it 24 hours a day. Well, I'm Ollie the oyster, let's sing hip hip hooray. Sometimes I'm butch and sometimes I'm gay. I live on a painted stick underneath the sea. You guys came along and wanted to eat me.
This is
me, mates.
optical test, by the way. Those not singing
My mother and
can't
my father were bisexual. They rolled around vessel in a shell. They rolled round the bottom of the ocean till one of them let off the mighty spell. Well, I'm Ollie the oyster, let's sing hip hip hooray. Sometimes I'm butch and sometimes I'm gay. I live on a maiden stick underneath the sea. You guys came along and wanted to eat me, and it does not be nice. Well, I found out why they call me a crustacean, because I'm only here for your frustration. Well, the secret's nearly out that the ratio's about, and only 1 in every dozen works. Well, I'm Ollie the oyster, let's sing hip hip hooray. Sometimes I'm butch and sometimes I'm gay. I live on a payment stick underneath the sea. You guys came along and wanted to meet me. Does not be late. We do one more quick one? Yeah. I was fishing around the corner here one day looking for mud crabs. And I pulled up my trap and I had the biggest mud crab you've ever seen. He was that big across. I thought, what am I going to do? And I put him up the front of the boat and I said, you stay there. And I turned around to fix the trap up to put another one down, and that bit me right on the bottom. So this song's all about the mud crab. There once was a fisherman who lived on the river. He caught lots of mud crabs and he ate them for dinner. Then early one morning, while setting the pot, a dirty great mud crab bit him right on the bot. Tooralai, tooralai, 12 oysters a day, put the Viagra away. Tooralai, tooralai, I eat oysters for breakfast and mud crabs for tea. Well, he ran to the captain, for help did he plead. Dear skipper, please look after me. You silly old fishman, look what you've done. A dirty great mud crab's bitten you right on the bum. Tooralai, tooralai, 12 oysters a day, put the Viagra away. Tooralai, tooralai, I eat oysters for breakfast and mud crabs for tea. Well, the captain said, fisherman, I'm steering the boat. You better see the first mate, she'll think it's a joke. Well, he ran to the first mate, who thought it a farce, and pulled that great mud crab right off his tooralai. Tooralai, 12 oysters a day, put the Viagra away. Tooralai, tooralai, I eat oysters for breakfast and mud crabs for tea. Well, the next time you're eating mud crabs for tea, remember the fisherman, now that bloke was me. I still bear the scar on my left bottom cheek. And remember when I couldn't sit down for a week. Tooralai, tooralai, 12 oysters a day, put the Viagra away. Tooralai, tooralai, I eat oysters for breakfast and mud crabs for tea. Very good. I hope you're enjoying your day, folks, and getting those sandwiches. I hope you enjoyed the oysters. We're going to have to pull up anchor shortly, and we'll have a nice slow motor back down past some of the steep pits and things like that.
We're not going up further?
I think if we go any further, you'll miss your train.
Yeah.
You sure you're on the 20 to 2?
What train are we on?
20 to 2?
Choice of two. There's 20 to 2 and there's one after. It's about
You don't want to
three
get. You
something.
don't want to get the 2 o'clock one. It's
No.
absolutely crowded.
No,
Why?
it's full of people from Gloucester.
Yeah, because it's an express or something. To
They go up there to play housing.
the 2 o'clock train, you're lucky if you get a seat on.
I thought we were catching the later one.
You've got choice.
Well,
There's 1:40,
yeah,
then
you can get the
there's
20 to
an odd
3.
one at 2 o'clock, and then there's another one at 1:40.
Even later.
I've got all the flight tables in the bag.
We went down the pub there.
Well, we're weighing anchor to head back. The motor started and we're on our way. Well, here we go.
Again, a very expensive place to live now. Can't get any bigger than this.
Most
Here we go. Heading back. Heading back.
What are they, leases elsewhere, have they?
Problem with the lease, years ago when they took a lease on, they would pay the bond.
Pulling together a lecture.
So what you find is a lot of people I'll see you later. Jobs. But the big operators still got leases, they've still got staff and that sort of thing. They're putting tenders in to do a cleanup because they don't get talk about so they might be on Eureka just by doing cleanup.
Hello everybody, we're having a wonderful time.
Sure are, wonderful. We're going home now. Yeah, isn't it?
Yes, we're on the way home. Unbelievable rock formation.
That is in fact the interesting stuff because you're in honeycomb weathering there. We're headed home a bit sad, but it's been a very nice day. Really wonderful day. For the Neutral Bay Probus Club out on the wonderful Hawkesbury River. Magnificent river. We missed the train. Well, who cares? There's nothing wrong with the Hawkesbury. Who wants to catch a train back to Sydney? It's okay. It's only a goods train. No, the passenger train is yet to come. So things are not all that bad really. It's a tough way to go home.
Railway. That was called Long Island, and I think somebody nicknamed it Brooklyn.
We're now dawdling a bit because we missed the first train, but we're going to catch the next one.
Very few people realise there's actually train stations.
It's a very nice part of the world, it really is.
In fact, that often gives their countries get off to that fourth line because they're going to Brisbane.
And in behind us is Dangarah. Late ride to Brooklyn and the big smoker city.
Each one of those stands, 27 metres.